stage, please, Jane Clayson Johnson and panelists Beth Daly, David Miller, Judge Thomas Griffith, and Dave Checketts.
So thank you very much for a wonderful morning, really illuminating and just fantastic information. I'm going to get right to the introduction of our panelists. My name is Jane Clayson Johnson, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel on faith in the public arena. So we have four fantastic panelists here. To my immediate right, Thomas B. Griffith was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit by President George W. Bush in 2005. He retired from the D.C. Circuit in 2020 and is currently special counsel at the law firm Hutton Andrews Kurth. He's also a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, a fellow at the Wheatley Institute at Brigham Young University, and a member of the board of directors of Interfaith America. Much of his writing and speaking these days addresses how to create a more perfect union out of a polarized nation. Next on the panel is Beth Daly, editor and general manager of The Conversation US, a nonprofit newsroom that translates academic research, including work on religion, ethics, and civic life, into accessible journalism that helps the public engage in complex issues. Beth spent more than 2 decades at the Boston Globe, fellow Bostonians, where she covered environment, science, and education, and was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her climate reporting. A Knight Fellow at Stanford University, Beth explored new models of journalism and founded EnviroFact, a project to fact-check environmental claims in the news. Next, David Miller, PhD. David is director of the Faith and Work Initiative at Princeton University and senior professional specialist in ethics at Princeton's Keller Center for Innovation. Before academia, David spent 16 years in international finance, including as a director at HSBC and State Street Bank. A sought-after advisor to CEOs and global organizations, he's been called an on-call ethicist by the Wall Street Journal and has presented on restoring trust and values-based leadership at international forums, including at Davos and the Yale CEO Summit. And finally, Dave Checketts, a veteran sports executive and investor. He served as president and CEO of Madison Square Garden, overseeing the Knicks, Rangers, MSG Network, and the launch of the WNBA's New York Liberty. Dave was previously the youngest NBA team president when he led the Utah Jazz at the age of 28. In recent years, he co-launched Cynosure, Checketts Sports Capital, a $1.2 billion venture to invest in high-potential sports enterprises, and he spent 3 years presiding over the London mission for his church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, I have a lot of questions, and I hope our conversation will unfold organically. But to start us off, Judge Griffith, you've spent your career at the intersection of law and public service and faith. In a time when faith can feel either private and sidelined, or public and sometimes polarizing, how do you see the proper role of faith in the public square today?
Well, thank you, and thank you for convening us, and thank you for the folks who've put this together. This is an example, I think, of what people of faith should be doing. Meeting in public and talking about the positive role that faith and religion can and must play. But my views on the question you asked me can really be summarized best in a cartoon. Now, I don't have it on the screen, but I'm going to describe it to you, okay? So you have to imagine a cartoon where St. Peter is standing in front of the pearly gates, and he's at a rostrum, and a newly arrived applicant is standing before St. Peter. And St. Peter looks at him and says, "You were a believer, yeah, but did you have to be such a jerk about it?" So we live in a time, as Professor Burge demonstrates so well, of increasing secularization. When we, as people of faith, hear things like religious liberty. When you hear that phrase, religious liberty, we get warm, fuzzy feelings in our heart. Increasingly, there are Americans who don't feel that way. When they think of religious liberty, they think of bigotry, they think of partisan politics, and so for people of faith in the public square, it's incumbent upon us to show them, no, that's not what the great religious traditions do. What the great religious traditions do in their highest and best aspiration is they unite people. They bring people together in reconciliation. They find common ground in the common humanity, the fact that we're all children of God. And so to the extent that we have a positive role to play in public life, I think it has to be there. I think it has to be. We need to be outspoken about how our faith informs our ability, our desire to reconcile. Dean Randy Hollerith of the Washington National Cathedral is a great friend, and he's careful to point out that he never refers to Martin Luther King as just Dr. Martin Luther King. He says, it's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That's the vision that we need to have, that our faith leads us to positive actions of reconciliation in this world here and now.
Thank you. Beth, at the conversation, you look to research to solve societal issues and help scholars utilize language that promotes understanding around religion and religious pluralism. Can you share an example of how your approach has helped people talk about religion or belief in a way that is healthier, more constructive, less polarizing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and thank you. I'm really so delighted to be here. We really look at research on religion and faith and how it can sort of bridge a gap to the public and often to the workplace as well, as an extension of a public arena. What's really interesting to me, and I think to many researchers, is that in many workplaces, people say, bring your whole self, bring your whole self to work. And people do, but religion is left at the door most of the time. We all know this. But faith is an incredibly important part of diversity. It's critical when you think about it. But yet no one wants to talk about it. And we know why, right? It's related to partisan politics these days, or perceived to be. People are worried they will have to defend their beliefs to someone else. As the nuns, no religion rises. They don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. So it's left at the door. But what's really interesting, research shows, is that 1 in 5 people actually go to work because they have a spiritual calling to that job. It's incredibly important. So how do you do it? How do you bring your religion to the workplace or to an arena that does not feel everything you said, like you're being a jerk, right? Like in many ways. And research shows, particularly a wonderful researcher at Rice University and her colleagues, Elaine Eklund, there's ways to do it, and it's not by simply obeying the law of accommodation, right? Everyone must accommodate and having the employee ask for accommodation. It's leaning in. It's simple stuff. It's making sure that all the religious holidays of all your employees are on the calendar. It's making sure that when you have a party, you don't necessarily always at a bar. This came up in my organization as well. It's inviting people to make, we did this more when we were not so remote, having people bring in the food of their religious traditions. And research shows it really works. It really works. All of a sudden, religion is not a polarizing aspect, but a community aspect that you, Judge, spoke so deeply of.
So, Dr. Miller, your work actually picks up on that, which I find so interesting and a great segue. Your work at the Faith and Work Initiative at Princeton helps people integrate faith into their professional lives in healthy, constructive ways. You often talk about the Sunday-Monday gap, which I think is great. The disconnect between what people profess in their faith communities and then how they practice that the rest of the week at work or in other settings. So why do you think that gap exists, number one, and how can people of faith begin to bridge it?
First, I want to find out if there's a gap between my lips and the microphone. Is this working?
You're good. I think you're good.
Thank you. And I want to echo the appreciation for all the organizers. This is extraordinary. I've been kicking around in what some people call the Faith at Work movement for about 25 years, thinking about it, writing it, studying it, and also being an actor in this movement. And it's really stunning, and yet at some level not a surprise to see all of you here because of the interest that many people have in trying to integrate the claims of their faith with the demands of their work. And for that, in many ways, the driving question for me, how do I integrate the claims of my faith with the demands of my work? Because the reality is the workplace often has different demands and aren't aligned with one's faith tradition. But why is it that there's this resistance? And yes, I do use the phrase Sunday, Monday gap, but I also want to correct that phrase because it depends on who, words matter. Words really matter. They're powerful. And who am I talking to? So if it's an audience that's Christian, I might say the Sunday, Monday gap, where what they hear from the pulpit bears no relationship to what they find when they go into their office on Monday. But it's whatever your Sabbath is. So maybe it's the Saturday Monday gap. Maybe it's the Friday Monday gap. But there's also traditions like Hinduism and Sikhism and others that don't really have a Sabbath as such, but there are times of rest and focus. So that's what we're talking about, the gap between whatever your tradition is, its teachings and how it manifests itself and how you live it out. What does it look like on Monday? That's what really intrigues me. So why is there this gap? Because many people, there's a great book written about 30 years ago called Your Work Matters to God. Your work matters to God. But you don't often hear it from the pulpit. And when I talk to my Jewish friends or my Muslim friends, or whatever different tradition, it's sad how seldom clergy will actually talk about the challenges and also the opportunities, the powerful opportunities of work as a place of humanity to exist, as a work or place to produce things, to have healing and to care for people. So in some ways, with all due respect, and I'm a product of it, I used to be an investment banker and so forth, and then I studied theology. And in my years of theological studies, seldom did I hear any courses, let alone lectures, dedicated to what does your faith look like on Monday. And so I've written about it. I wrote a book several years ago called God at Work, The History and Promise of the Faith at Work Movement. And in it, I conclude there's 4 different ways that people can bring their faith to work. And we won't go through all of them, but it's everything from ethics to how do I live it out, how do I embody it, finding meaning and purpose. That work could be a spiritual calling for many people, either what we do or how we do it. So I find that it's largely the laity that are overcoming this gap, and sadly the Academy is a little bit behind in realizing that men and women increasingly want to find out, okay, I just heard that great message in my worship community, but what does it mean when I go back to work on Monday? How does it prop me up, encourage me? How can it be a balm in Gilead when I'm in a tough place? So there's hope, and it's largely this room. So I'm very excited about it. Thank you.
Dave Chekas, pick up on that. You've led some of the biggest brands in sports and entertainment, where leadership decisions play out on a very public stage. Tell us more about how your faith has shaped your leadership and decision-making in a very public arena.
Well, thank you. Again, I repeat what my colleagues have said. What a blessing it is to see this room full and to have you here and to be thoughtful about this. I didn't recognize what an extraordinary panel I might be on here until just a few days ago. David Miller, just to my left, wrote me an email. Now, you've all heard about the tremendous tragedy that happened in Michigan when someone attacked a Latter-day Saint chapel, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of which I'm a lifelong member, where someone attacked the chapel, burned it down, attacked people, innocent worshipers, people there trying to be better. And so often in our religious communities, we think that we suffer alone and that no one else really cares. But David Miller, who I had not met until an hour ago, sent me a simple email that said, "Dear Dave, I'm thinking about you and your church today in light of this terrible tragedy." And that's when I knew he was someone I wanted to meet. We have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be whoever we are, but to be that person all of the time. That's the Sunday-Monday gap. Stephen Covey, who was a great, great writer who wrote the 7 Basic Habits of Effective People, was a mentor of mine in business school. And Steve Covey taught the importance of integrity, of always being the same person, no matter whether you're at work or in your religious community or in your service community, whatever it is you do. He wrote about and taught about the importance of being the same person, of holding on to those same values no matter where you exist. And when you do that, you can trust yourself and others will learn to trust you. Now, my blessing was growing up in a home where I was taught early on the importance of faith-based action. And when I was very young, actually the first verse of the Book of Mormon, which we hold dear as a blessing from God, a doctrinal treatise on the life and mission of Jesus Christ and a second witness to Jesus Christ. But the first paragraph says, I, Nephi, speaking of a prophet, I, Nephi, was born of goodly parents, and therefore I was raised basically in the learnings of my father. And the learnings that I was raised with was the importance of emulating, following, learning from Jesus Christ. And that has been the greatest blessing of my life, to learn from him, to try to be like him, to emulate him and his service and his blessing and his healing and the way that he lived his life. And I have not done that at all perfectly. But what it's allowed me to do as I've dealt with in the world of professional athletes and sports is to have great compassion for people who come from all walks of life, who are under enormous pressure to perform, who are under enormous pressure to win, who are adored by the public for probably not their character, but their athletic skill, and to help them kind of deal with all of that successfully. And I have found that led me to use a teaching of Jesus that I cherish, which is we have second chances. We have another opportunity. We can change. We can repent. We can get better. And that's not how I've taught these athletes, but it's how I've tried to live around them. And then during their crisis times, to teach them that truth, that they will have 1 and 2 and maybe 100 or 1,000 second chances. They will have heaven and God forgive them for their weakness, and they will have a chance tomorrow to get better.
Thank you. Judge, let me come back to you for a moment, because I know you often bring people of faith together to have these conversations. Literally, recently, under the roof of the Washington National Cathedral, to model what conversations of faith can look like, what reconciliation can look like in a divided time. So as you have led these gatherings, not just in Washington, but around the country, what have you learned about how people of faith can disagree better, and how faith can be a force in unity rather than division in this country?
Thank you. What Jane's referring to is we stumbled, I'm at the Wheatley Institute at Brigham Young University, and we helped put on a program about 1.5 years ago where we stumbled upon something that we think is magic. Not really magic, but it worked really well. What we did is we got together 2 politicians from different sides of the spectrum, Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, Governor Spencer Cox of Utah, and we brought them together in the Washington National Cathedral. Now, I have to tell you, that was accidental that we had it. When we were planning this event in the first place, it wasn't going to be the National Cathedral, but it became available And we had this event in the National Cathedral where these two political opponents see the world very differently, but they also see each other with respect because they recognize that they're not enemies, but they're friends with just different views about tax rates and things like that. And we got them together in the Washington National Cathedral to talk about how faith can overcome this toxic polarization. We filled the National Cathedral. That's a big place. We didn't expect that. We had 30,000 people watch it online, and when it was over, I had 3 foundations come to me and say, you keep doing that, and we'll pay for it. Because to see political leaders, and especially governors, apparently the research shows that governors can, for some reason, move the needle, to see them in a house of worship talking about the absolute need to overcome this toxic polarization and how their faith informs them to do so. They said, we'll pay for that. So we've done that now 4 or 5 times around the country. Breaking news announcement. We're going to do it again on December 9th at the Washington National Cathedral. This time it's going to be Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania and Governor Cox from Utah. And what happens at these events, being in a sacred space, there is a sense that these are people of faith, that they're saying what my faith is compelling me to do at this moment is something very, very specific. That at this moment in time, what our faith can do to help our country and the world is to push back against this toxic polarization, that we ought to be able to disagree with one another, but without the contempt, to recognize that you're a Democrat, you have bad ideas about taxes. I'm just making that up. You have bad ideas about that, but you're not a bad person. You're not a bad person. And that's the danger that we're in today. And if I can put my former judge's hat on for a moment, I've been a student of the Constitution my whole life. Not a scholar like Professor McConnell or President Sexton, but a student of the Constitution. And in my personal belief, this is the most perilous moment for the United States Constitution since 1859. That was a pretty bad moment. What's different about our situation right now is not that people are disagreeing with each other. Goodness, we want people to disagree. We're Americans. I want everything to be disagreed about, right? But it's the nature of the disagreement, because what social research has shown is that the type of disagreements that we have right now are being driven by hatred and contempt for the other side. It's not just that you have bad ideas, you are a bad person. And I'll tell you here, the Constitution cannot survive when a citizenry holds one another in contempt. Someone has got to push back against that. And my personal belief is the greatest resource to do that is in this room, is with people of faith, is we see that our primary obligation as people of faith is to bring about reconciliation. I'm filibustering here, I don't mean to, but let me add one last thing. I'm a Christian. I practice my Christianity as a Latter-day Saint. For Christians, in the Lord's Prayer, the first thing Jesus tells us to pray for is not how do I get to heaven. That's important, okay? That's not what he tells us to pray for. The first thing that he tells us to pray for is that thy kingdom come, thy will be done, where? On earth as it is in heaven. So Christians, people of faith generally, our primary spiritual duty is to push back against this contemptuous dialogue that President Sexton spoke about so powerfully.
So Beth, jump in on that.
Yeah.
What practical steps can people take based on your work and your research to bridge these gaps?
Yeah, and I totally agree. And it's not just everyone in this room, it's everyone in America who believes what I think most people actually don't believe, I hope, is that hate is really the foundation. I think you hear it in the media too much, that the way people are feeling. But I think all faiths are united around some wonderful virtuous behaviors, which are things like humility and curiosity, open-mindedness, even defiance used in a great way. But it those traits, and research shows, but also my own faith, and if you exercise those traits at work, in public, as you mentioned, it unites people because all of a sudden you're kind of lowering the temperature really quickly, and that's the most important thing. I see it even with my wonderful team. It's easy to get irritated because people are so cemented in their beliefs, and you just say like, hey, why don't you look at that from someone else's point of view? Just bring it down. And I think that's exactly what you're doing, but you're also doing with leaders who can really drive that. So.
Easier said than done. It really is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Definitely.
David, you have taught a class at Princeton since 2008, oversubscribed every year. You developed and taught about faith and bridging gaps, and I want you to talk a little bit about that because I'm really interested after this research and these numbers, how your students and young people are responding to the ideas of faith and bridge building, and what you're seeing in the next generation when it comes to ethics and purpose and faith.
Right. So, the course was originally entitled something like Business Ethics and Modern Theological Thought. Now, how's that for a real exciting thing to sign up for? The students over the years have nicknamed the course Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. Okay. In fact, a shameless plug, following in Ryan's shoes, I've written a book with Susan Richardson, who I think is somewhere here, a colleague of mine from Princeton, also with me in the Princeton Faith and Work Initiative, called the 5 Questions for Ethical Decisions, Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. And the reason that the students nicknamed that is ethics traditionally, business ethics is traditionally taught either through a jurisprudence point of view, which makes complete sense, the law really matters, or it's taught through secular moral philosophy, also very important. I want to know what Plato said and the Epicureans and so forth. But in the past 40 or 50 years, one of the greatest intellectual traditions has sort of been taboo in the academy, and that's religion. Mm-hmm. But take the great religious thinkers, take Maimonides, take Aquinas, they were giants. I would put them up against any philosophers today or before. So all I'm doing in this course is giving students intellectual permission to think about the role their faith might play in ethics as their North Star. And I make very clear to the students at the beginning of class, you don't have to be religious or spiritually inclined to be in this class, but you have to be respectful for those who are. Equally, for those of you who are religious or spiritually inclined, you need to be respectful for those who aren't. So Susan also is a lecturer, guest lecturer, that's a preceptor, runs the smaller groups after the lectures. And one of the things we've done is I survey the class every year, so I know exactly their religious identity, anonymous polling, obviously. And I know that every time I teach this course, there are 22 to 25% of the students self-describe as atheists or agnostics. Yet they're taking this course. Why? Because I have them reading some of the great texts, the original texts of the great religious thinkers. I focus primarily on the 3 Abrahamic traditions, but increasingly I'm opening up to every tradition, because those are my students. They're from all traditions. So I think they just need intellectual permission, number one. Number two, that they'll push back if they feel they're being sold something, but they're curious. They're realizing all the toys, all the money, all the fun, even the elitism as being at a place like Princeton, that at the end of the day, you still have an empty heart. It doesn't fill it up. And that faith in however one discovers it, is important. And they're going back to the great traditions. So a lot of the data, and I know you all know this, but of the so-called nuns, it doesn't mean they don't believe. They're just a little bit confused. They haven't signed up with one program, so to speak. And I find my students really interested to want to know more about this. By the way, we don't talk about orthodoxy in the class, so to right belief. That's not an unimportant question, but it's not the purpose of this course. We talk about orthopraxy. So what is right practice? What is your faith? You were talking, Dave, about how, as an LDS member, that there are certain things that have been taught to you, as how you treat other people with dignity and so forth. So that becomes your North Star. So I'm interested in orthopraxy. What does it mean to be a Sabbath-observant Jew? What does it mean to be a practicing Catholic? And on it goes. But I'm also really interested in what does it mean to be an atheist or an agnostic? What's your North Star? I asked the students 5 questions, hence the title of the book. The question 1 is what is ethics? That's one thing, fine. The second question I asked is, what's the source of your ethics? And that's maybe the $1 million question. What's the source of your ethics? Your rabbi, your priest, your coach, your mom, your dad, your religion, you sooner or later you bump into metaphysical questions, like where did they get it from? And where your grandma got it from somewhere. So the third question is ethical decision-making frameworks. How do you make decisions in the ethical gray zone, which is where most of us live? The fourth is, what's your public language, which I've seen role modeled by everyone here. How do I respectfully be true to my faith tradition or my worldview, yet be respectful of the person I'm talking with who may have a totally different worldview? And the last question of the five is, how do you stay ethically fresh? How do you stay ethically fit? How do you stay ethically on your game? We all watched a month or so ago, I shouldn't laugh, but the Coldplay concert with the poor CEO who was caught having an apparent relationship with his chief HR officer. Well, I'm sure he's a good guy, and she is, but what happened? Like, where did they go wrong? So how do we stay ethically fresh? How do I make sure I'm not that guy as well? The students are desperate to have those kind of conversations. They want role models. So I invite different CEOs and thought leaders from all different traditions so that they can say, well, I can kind of get to the top, like, say, you've done, Dave, in your field, and I don't have to sell my soul to do it. It may not be linear, it may not be straight, but it's doable.
I got to get into this class.
Please.
I mean, it just sounds so
Me
good.
too.
It's too late. Too late for us. Too late for us.
Well, you can come be a guest, so consider yourself invited for the spring.
I'll be there every time.
Dave Checkis, I don't want to embarrass you, but I went to the Sports Business Journal cover story a couple of weeks ago and printed out this really exceptional article about you, where you're described as someone who thinks really big, someone who has built bold organizations while staying deeply people-centered. They don't take too long to get to your faith in this article. In an industry that often measures success in wins and ratings and revenue, talk about defining success differently in terms of your faith.
Well, it is the one industry that is totally dependent upon the performance of human beings and them coming together and being united in a cause. That's what I love about it. The other thing I love about it is, like faith, only in a different way, it moves people in an incredible way when their team wins, when their team succeeds. And so to be in New York during the 90s, where the Knicks every year were deep in the playoffs, in the NBA Finals, was one of the great periods of my life. But there were just experience after experience where faith came up. And one of the most obvious was, in 1999, our team had had a great decade together, and the coach and the general manager of our club came to me and said, there's a player we want to get in the off season. He's not your style, but we still want him. And you've got to come to the party on this. You've got to get used to this. The player was a player named Latrell Sprewell, who had just had a little mistake, let's say, in Golden State when he was playing there. After practice, he grew very upset with his coach and misbehaved. He tried to kill it. He put his arms around his neck. This 6'7" athlete put his hands around his neck, and if not for the efforts of his teammates, it would have been a tragedy to kill such a wonderful coach and good guy. But that's what he did. And now, after being suspended for 2 years, my coach and general manager wanted me to bring him here, and I just said, I will never have him on our team. I'll never have him. We're not bringing him to New York. New York is tough enough to be in this environment and the pressures and everything else. We have to have the right kind of people, mentally tough, but they have to have a guiding star, or they will not survive here. They just kept at me time after time. And finally I said, okay, I will agree to interview him, but we have to fly to where he lives. I want to sit down with him. I want to really hear from him. And then we'll come back, we'll fly back together, and we'll decide whether we're going to actually go down this path. All of that took place. It's a much longer story. I had a delightful interview with this guy. And then as Latrell walked me to the front door, the coaches and managers were already out in the car. But as Latrell walked me to the front door and was saying goodbye, I noticed over his shoulder was this poem called Footprints in the Sand. You probably, most of you have heard about it. It describes a man telling about his life, and there's a certain period of time where there's only one set of footprints in the sand, and he turns to God and says, "Why did you leave me alone?" At that hard moment in my life, and of course the response is, "I carried you." And I said to Latrell, I said, "Is that your poem, or did your wife put that up, or how did this come about?" He said, "Oh, no. That's right here." And he proceeded to say it to me, word perfect, from memory. I walked out of the house thinking that was such an answer to prayer, but I was still uncertain. I flew home. It was on a Sunday. I walked into this wonderful family dinner with all of our kids. We have 6 children. And we're sitting there around the table, and as we finish eating, I say to the kids, "Okay, you might as well know this now. We're going to bring Latrell Sprewell to New York. And he's going to be a Knick. And we're going to forgive him, and we're going to support him, and we're going to try to get him back to who he was as a player, but more so to keep him where he should be as a person." 3 of my sons all stood up and threw their napkins at the table and said, "That's it, Dad. We're not going to any games. We're never going to be a fan of the team again." And they were deep inside this team. "We're never going to follow this team again." And they all take off. They leave. There's one boy left at the table, our youngest son, Ben, who's 11 years old, sitting there, and he hasn't stopped eating his dinner at all. None of this even impacted him. So it's just he and I say to Ben, "Ben, you got to help me here. What's your thought on all this?" And he looks up from his mashed potatoes and gravy, and he says, "Dad, don't we believe in second chances?" I said, "Yes, son, we do. We sure do. And we're going to show that." And we brought him here, and in 1999, really he led the Knicks all the way to the NBA Finals. If we'd beaten San Antonio instead of lost in Game 6, if we'd beaten them, he would have been the MVP of the NBA Finals. And he remains to this day a close friend of mine and our family, and we just deserve second chances. And when the New York Times asked me how I made the decision, I told that story. It is not to try to establish ourselves in any way as better than, only that our faith had really led us to deal with a circumstance that was a tough decision at the time.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you. Thank you. I'm mindful of the time that's in front of us, but I'd like to go round robin around this terrific panel with this last question. And if you could just take a minute or less to answer. If you could give one piece of advice to emerging leaders or anyone of faith who want to engage in the public arena, whether it's in law or journalism or business or education, in an elevated way, what would you say? Judge, I'll begin with you.
Very simple. Be a peacemaker. Be a peacemaker. Make that your identity. I'm a person who builds bridges of understanding. I work for peace between people.
Thank you. Beth.
And be open-minded. Just go into a room with an open heart and an open mind. And it's amazing what happens if you can actually do that, because you get to that peace-building process.
Thank you.
I would say what's the old saying? The good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in that ratio. I would say we should ask questions. Why do you believe that? Why do you feel that? If it's not too personal, I may ask, do you have a faith or spiritual inclination? Tell me about it. Learn. Just ask questions. Show respect. Ask questions. Show respect. As opposed to shifting into, how do I debate that point? How do I convince her or him of my view? Ask questions. Show respect. Ask questions. Show respect.
Beautiful. Thank you. Last word, Dave Checketts.
Oh, wow, the last word. I was blessed to be named after a great man who became the president and prophet of the Latter-day Saint, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His name was David O. McKay. My mother loved him and named me after him. One of the things that, he's quoting someone else when he said this, but he said it all the time. And I try to teach all of our missionaries this in England. It is better to be trusted than to be loved. Trust is a higher form of love. And it is a great blessing when it enters into relationships or organizations or teams. The ability to trust makes everything better. So be someone in your marriage, in your family, at your workplace, in your place of worship. Be someone who can be counted on, who can be trusted to always do the right thing.
Dave Checketts, David Miller, Beth Daly, Thomas Griffith. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.